The rain fell in heavy sheets over the small town of Cedar Falls, Oregon, painting the streets in shades of gray and silver. Marcus Webb pulled his pickup truck into the parking lot of a roadside diner, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. He cut the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof, watching droplets race down the glass like tiny rivers finding their way to the sea. 37 years old, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and hands that had seen more than most people could imagine, Marcus looked like what he was. A man who had spent the better part of 2 decades serving his country in ways that would never make the evening news. The scars on his forearms told stories he would never share. The grey streaking his close-cropped dark hair spoke of stress that had nothing to do with age. He had been driving for 6 hours, heading nowhere in particular. That was the thing about leaving the teams after 18 years. You spent so long knowing exactly what you were supposed to do, where you were supposed to be, who you were supposed to be with. Then one day they hand you your discharge papers and a handshake, and suddenly the world opens up in a way that feels less like freedom and more like falling. Marcus grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit him immediately, seeping through the fabric of his shirt, but he barely noticed. He had endured far worse in places he could never talk about. The diner was called Rosie's, according to the flickering neon sign above the door. It was the kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same for the past 40 years. Red vinyl booths, a long counter with spinning stools, and the smell of coffee and bacon grease hanging in the air like a permanent resident. A bell jingled above the door as Marcus pushed it open. Inside, a few scattered customers occupied the booths. An elderly couple sharing a piece of pie. A trucker nursing a cup of coffee while staring at his phone. A young mother trying to corral 2 energetic boys who seemed determined to turn their booth into a wrestling ring. Marcus took a seat at the counter, positioning himself instinctively with his back to the wall and a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. Old habits. The kind that never really die. "What can I get you, hun?" The waitress was in her 50s, with kind eyes, and the sort of tired smile that came from working too many double shifts. Her name tag read Debbie. "Just coffee," Marcus said, "black. Coming right up." As Debbie poured his coffee, Marcus let his eyes wander around the diner. It was then that he noticed her. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting alone in the booth farthest from the door. She had tangled blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in days, and she was wearing a thin jacket that was completely inadequate for the weather outside. Her face was pale, her eyes too big for her thin face, and she was sitting perfectly still, staring at nothing. Something about the way she held herself, so rigid, so controlled, triggered alarms in Marcus's mind. In his years of service, he had learned to read people the way others read books. This child was afraid. Deeply, profoundly afraid. He watched her for a few moments longer, trying to figure out who she belonged to. The young mother with the boys? No, she was clearly occupied with her own children. The elderly couple? They seemed lost in their own world, feeding each other bites of pie with the comfortable intimacy of 50 years of marriage. "That little girl over there," Marcus said quietly to Debbie when she returned to refill his cup. "She with anyone?" Debbie glanced over and something flickered across her face. Concern, maybe, or something else. "She came in about an hour ago," Debbie said, keeping her voice low. "Alone. Just walked right in out of the rain. I gave her some hot chocolate. Figured maybe her mom was in the bathroom or something, but nobody came for her." "You call anyone?" "I was about to call the sheriff's department, but you know how they are, understaffed, underfunded. Takes them forever to respond to anything that's not an active emergency." She shook her head. "Poor little thing won't say a word, just sits there like a ghost." Marcus nodded slowly, his coffee forgotten. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of children in war zones, in refugee camps, in places where innocents went to die. It was the look of someone who had learned far too young that the world was not a safe place. He made a decision. Mind if I go talk to her? Debbie studied him for a moment, and Marcus knew what she was seeing, a large, intimidating man wanting to approach a vulnerable child. In any other circumstance, she would have been right to be suspicious. "You got kids?" she asked. "No," Marcus admitted, "but I spent a lot of years in places where kids needed help. I know how to talk to them." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because Debbie nodded slowly. "Go ahead. But I'm watching." "I'd expect nothing less." Marcus picked up his coffee and walked over to the booth where the girl sat. He slid into the seat across from her, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible on the table. She flinched when he sat down, her whole body tensing like a cornered animal, but she didn't run. "Hey there," Marcus said, keeping his voice gentle. "My name's Marcus. What's yours?" The girl just stared at him with those enormous, haunted eyes. Up close, he could see the dark circles beneath them, the chapped skin around her lips, the dirt under her fingernails. This child hadn't just wandered away from her parents for an hour. She had been on her own for much longer than that. "It's okay if you don't want to talk," Marcus continued. "I get it. Strangers can be scary. But I noticed you're here all by yourself, and I thought maybe you could use a friend." Still nothing. The girl's hands were clenched in her lap, gripping the fabric of her worn jeans so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Marcus tried a different approach. "I used to be in the Navy," he said conversationally. "You know what the Navy is?" A tiny nod. "Progress. I spent a lot of time traveling to different places, meeting different people. And you know what I learned?" The girl's eyes flickered with something. Curiosity, maybe. "I learned that sometimes, when things get really scary, the bravest thing you can do is let someone help you. It's not easy. I know it's not. But it's true." For a long moment nothing happened. Then, so quietly that Marcus almost missed it, the girl spoke. "My name is Emma." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Such a small thing, a name. But it was a start. "That's a beautiful name, Emma." Emma's eyes darted toward the window, toward the rain still falling outside, and Marcus saw fear flash across her face again. "Are you hiding from someone, Emma?" The girl's whole body went rigid. Her breath came faster, shallower, and in that moment, Marcus knew. This wasn't a child who had gotten lost. This was a child who was running. "It's okay," he said quickly. "You don't have to tell me, but I want you to know something. Whatever's happening, whatever you're scared of, I'm going to help you. That's a promise." Emma looked at him then, really looked at him, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that broke his heart. Hope. Fragile, tentative, barely there, but hope nonetheless. "He'll find me," Emma whispered. "He always finds me." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Who, Emma? Who will find you?" But before she could answer, the bell above the diner door jingled. Emma's face went white as a sheet, and she shrank back against the booth, trying to make herself as small as possible. Marcus turned to look at the newcomer. He was a big man, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and a thick neck. He was wearing a rain-soaked jacket and jeans, and his face was red from the cold. But it was his eyes that Marcus noticed most. They were scanning the diner with a predatory intensity, searching for something, searching for someone. The man's gaze landed on Emma, and a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "There you are," he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "You had me worried sick, sweetheart, running off like that in this weather." He started walking toward their booth, and Marcus felt every muscle in his body coil with readiness. 18 years of training kicked in automatically. He assessed the threat. 6'2", maybe 220. No visible weapons, but the jacket was bulky enough to conceal a firearm, aggressive body language, predator mentality. And the way Emma was trembling, the way she had pressed herself against the back of the booth like she was trying to disappear into the vinyl, told Marcus everything he needed to know about the relationship between this man and this child. Marcus stood up, placing himself between the man and Emma. "Hold up there, friend." The man stopped, his smile fading into something harder. "Excuse me. I said hold up. The lady and I were having a conversation." "Lady." The man let out a harsh laugh. "That's my daughter. Now get out of my way." "Is that right?" Marcus didn't move. "Because she doesn't seem too happy to see you." The man's eyes narrowed. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this is none of your business. Emma, get over here, now." Emma let out a small whimper, and Marcus felt something cold and hard settle into his chest. It was a feeling he knew well, the feeling he got right before an operation, the feeling of absolute clarity, absolute certainty. This man was not leaving this diner with this child. "Here's the thing," Marcus said, his voice calm and level. "I think it is my business, because something tells me you're not this little girl's father. And even if you are, something tells me you don't have her best interests at heart." The man's face flushed an angry red. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I'm her father, and I'm taking her home. Now move, or I'll move you myself." "You're welcome to try." The words hung in the air between them. The diner had gone completely silent. The young mother had gathered her boys close, her face pale. The elderly couple had stopped eating, their eyes wide. Even the trucker had looked up from his phone. Debbie had picked up the phone behind the counter, her finger hovering over the buttons. The man stared at Marcus, and Marcus saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The man was big, probably used to intimidating people with his size. But there was something in Marcus's stance, in the set of his shoulders, in the absolute stillness of his body, that was giving him pause. "Who the hell are you?" the man demanded. "Nobody special," Marcus said. "Just a guy having coffee. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around, walk out that door, and drive away. And if you don't, well..." He paused. "Let's just say I've spent 18 years learning how to deal with people who hurt kids, and I'm very, very good at it." The man's hand twitched toward his jacket, and Marcus moved. It happened so fast that most people in the diner probably missed it. One moment the man was reaching for something. The next moment he was on the ground, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that was just shy of breaking, his face pressed against the linoleum floor. "Don't," Marcus said quietly, his knee pressing into the man's spine. "Whatever you're reaching for, don't." "Get off me!" the man snarled. "I'll sue you! I'll have you arrested!" "Debbie!" Marcus called over his shoulder, his voice still perfectly calm. "Call the sheriff, now!" "Duh!" "Already on it," Debbie replied, her voice shaky but determined. Marcus reached into the man's jacket with his free hand and pulled out what he had been reaching for. A knife. A hunting knife, with a 6-inch blade. "Interesting thing for a father to bring to pick up his daughter," Marcus observed. The man went still beneath him. "You don't understand. She's mine. I have custody. You can't do this." "We'll let the sheriff sort that out." Marcus looked over at Emma. She was still huddled in the booth, tears streaming down her face, but there was something else in her expression now. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. "It's okay, Emma," Marcus said gently. "He's not going to hurt you. I promise." And in that moment, looking at this broken little girl, Marcus Webb realized something. For the first time since he had left the teams, he knew exactly what he was supposed to do, where he was supposed to be, who he was supposed to help. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside Rosie's diner, something had shifted, something had changed, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The next 20 minutes were chaos. The sheriff's department arrived with sirens blaring, 2 deputies bursting through the door with their hands on their weapons. Marcus had already released the man by then, having secured the knife and positioned himself protectively near Emma. But he kept himself between her and her would-be captor the entire time. Deputy Sheriff Sarah Chen was a compact woman in her late 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense demeanor that Marcus immediately appreciated. She took one look at the scene, the trembling child, the belligerent man being restrained by her partner, the knife sealed in a plastic bag on the counter, and immediately understood the broad strokes of what had happened. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" she asked, though her question was directed at Marcus. He explained quickly and concisely, the way he had been trained to deliver after-action reports. The girl alone in the diner, her fear, the man's arrival, the confrontation. "And you are?" Deputy Chen asked. "Marcus Webb, former Navy, just passing through." Something flickered in Chen's eyes at the word Navy, but she didn't press. Instead, she turned to Emma, crouching down to the girl's eye level. "Hey, sweetie," she said, her voice gentling. "I'm Deputy Chen. Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," the girl whispered. "Emma Sullivan." Chen's face changed, just for a moment, just a flash, but Marcus caught it. Recognition. "Emma Sullivan," Chen repeated slowly. "From Millbrook." Emma nodded. Chen stood up abruptly and walked over to her partner, speaking in low, urgent tones. Marcus couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw the other deputy's face go pale. "What's going on?" Marcus asked. Chen turned back to him. "Mr. Webb, can I speak with you outside for a moment?" They stepped out under the diner's awning, the rain still falling in sheets just a few feet away. Chen pulled out her phone and showed Marcus a screen. It was an Amber Alert, dated 2 weeks ago. Emma Sullivan, age 7. Abducted from Millbrook, Oregon, approximately 300 miles south of Cedar Falls. Last seen in the company of 34-year-old Raymond Sims, her mother's ex-boyfriend, considered armed and dangerous. "That's him," Marcus said, nodding toward the diner. "Raymond Sims. That's him. We've been looking for this girl for 2 weeks. Her mother has been going out of her mind." Marcus felt the cold rain on his face, but he barely noticed. 2 weeks. This child had been in the hands of that man for 2 weeks. "How did you know?" Chen asked. "How did you know something was wrong?" Marcus considered the question. How did he explain 18 years of reading people, of identifying threats, of knowing when something wasn't right? How did he explain the way Emma's fear had radiated off her like heat from a fire? "I just knew," he said finally. "Sometimes you just know." Chen studied him for a long moment. "Well, Mr. Webb, whatever instinct led you to that little girl today, I'm glad you followed it. You probably saved her life. What happens now? Now we process Sims, contact Emma's mother, and get this little girl back where she belongs." Chen paused. "We'll need you to give a statement. Might take a few hours." "I'm not going anywhere." They went back inside. Sims was being led out in handcuffs, shouting about his rights, about false imprisonment, about how he was going to sue everyone involved. Marcus ignored him. His attention was on Emma. She was still sitting in the booth, but Debbie had joined her, wrapping a blanket around her thin shoulders and setting a fresh cup of hot chocolate in front of her. The girl looked so small, so fragile, but there was something different in her eyes now. The hunted look was fading, replaced by something that might, with time, grow into hope. Marcus walked over and sat down across from her again. "The deputies are going to call your mum," he said. "You're going home, Emma." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Really? Really? Will you stay?" The words came out in a rush, desperate and raw. "Until she comes?" Marcus looked at this child. "Will you stay?" This stranger he had known for less than an hour and felt something crack open in his chest. For 18 years, he had protected his country. He had gone to places most people couldn't find on a map and done things that would never be declassified. He had lost friends, lost pieces of himself, lost the ability to sleep through the night without waking up, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. And in all that time, he had never felt as certain about anything as he felt right now. "Yeah, Emma," he said. "I'll stay." The hours passed slowly after that. Marcus gave his statement to Deputy Chen, recounting every detail of the encounter, with the clinical precision of a man used to debriefing after missions. He learned more about Emma's situation too. Her mother, Jennifer Sullivan, was a nurse in Millbrook, who had dated Raymond Sims for about a year before realizing he was dangerous. She had ended the relationship, gotten a restraining order, tried to do everything right, but Sims had been patient. He had waited, and one day when Jennifer was at work and Emma was walking home from school, he had taken her. The Amber Alert had gone out immediately, but Sims had been careful. He had moved constantly, never staying in one place more than a day or two, always paying in cash, always keeping Emma hidden. The police had been chasing shadows for 2 weeks, until today. Until a random diner in a random town in the middle of a rainstorm. Jennifer Sullivan arrived at the Cedar Falls Sheriff's Station 6 hours later. Marcus heard her before he saw her, her voice echoing down the hallway, desperate and raw with emotion. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" He stepped out of the interview room just as Jennifer burst through the doors. She was in her early 30s, with the same blonde hair as Emma, though hers was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale from exhaustion, but she was moving like a woman possessed. When she saw Emma, sitting in a chair in the hallway with a deputy beside her, Jennifer let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a mother's heart breaking and healing all at once. Emma. Oh God. Emma. She swept her daughter into her arms, holding her so tightly it looked almost painful, rocking back and forth as tears streamed down both their faces. "Mommy," Emma whispered, and the word carried 18 years of Marcus's own buried emotions with it. "Mommy, I knew you'd come. I knew it. I'm here, baby. I'm here. I'm never letting you go again. Never." Marcus stood off to the side, watching the reunion. He felt like an intruder, witnessing something too private, too sacred for outside eyes, but he couldn't look away. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Jennifer finally looked up. Her eyes found Marcus, and something passed between them. Gratitude, understanding, a connection forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. "You're him," she said, her voice hoarse. "You're the one who saved her." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I just happened to be there." Anyone would have done the same. "No." Jennifer shook her head firmly. "No, they wouldn't have. People walk past situations like this every day. They tell themselves it's not their business. They look the other way." She stood up, Emma still clinging to her hand. "You didn't look the other way. You saw my daughter, and you helped her." She crossed the distance between them, and before Marcus could react, threw her arms around him. It was awkward, this embrace from a stranger, but Marcus found himself returning it. "Thank you," Jennifer whispered. "Thank you for bringing her back to me." When she pulled away, Marcus saw Emma looking at him with those big, serious eyes. "Are you going away now?" she asked. The question hit Marcus harder than he expected. In the teams, he had always had a mission, a purpose, a reason to be somewhere. When the mission was over, you moved on to the next one. That was how it worked. But Emma wasn't a mission. She was a little girl who had been through hell and was looking at him like he was the only solid ground in a world that had proven itself treacherous. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't really have anywhere to be." Jennifer and Emma exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes in the silent language of mothers and daughters. "We live in Millbrook," Jennifer said slowly. "It's about 5 hours south of here. It's not much, but there's a community there. Good people." She paused. "If you're not in a hurry to be anywhere else, maybe you could follow us back. Make sure we get there safe." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. The danger was over. Sims was in custody. There was no reason Marcus needed to escort them anywhere, but sometimes the best reasons aren't logical ones. "Yeah," Marcus said, "I could do that." The drive to Millbrook took them through some of the most beautiful country Marcus had ever seen. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and glistening in the late afternoon sun. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still dusted with snow. Rivers wound through valleys carpeted in evergreen forests. It was the kind of landscape that made you believe in things like peace and healing. Marcus followed Jennifer's sedan at a respectful distance, close enough to keep them in sight, but far enough to give them space. He knew they needed time together, mother and daughter, to begin the long process of healing from this ordeal. His phone rang about 2 hours into the drive. He glanced at the caller ID and felt a familiar mix of emotions. Webb. Marcus. The voice on the other end was deep and gravelly, the voice of a man who had smoked too many cigars and shouted too many orders. "Got a call from a deputy sheriff in Oregon. Said you stopped an abduction. Word travels fast, Chief." Master Chief William Bull Harrison had been Marcus's commanding officer for the last 8 years of his career. He was also the closest thing Marcus had to a father figure, having taken a young, angry recruit and shaped him into one of the most effective operators the teams had ever produced. "Everything travels fast when it involves one of my boys. You okay?" "I'm fine. It wasn't exactly a high-risk op. Guy had a knife. I had 18 years of training. Wasn't much of a contest." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Marcus sighed. Bull had always been able to see through his deflections. "Yeah, Chief, I'm okay. Maybe better than okay, actually." "Yeah? How's that?" Marcus thought about Emma, about Jennifer, about the way it had felt to do something good for someone, something simple and direct, without committees or briefings or rules of engagement. "I don't know how to explain it," he admitted. "But today felt like the first time since I got out that I knew what I was supposed to be doing." Bull was quiet for a moment. "You know, Marcus, a lot of guys have trouble when they leave. They spend so long being part of something bigger, and then suddenly they're alone. It messes with your head." "I know. But here's the thing nobody tells you. The skills don't go away. The instincts don't go away. The need to protect people, to make a difference, that doesn't go away either. You just have to find a new way to use them. Is this your subtle way of telling me to become a cop?" Bull laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "God, no. You'd be terrible at filling out paperwork. But there are other ways to serve, other ways to protect. You just have to find yours." After they hung up, Marcus thought about Bull's words. He was still thinking about them when they pulled into Millbrook 3 hours later. Millbrook was exactly the kind of town Marcus would have driven through without stopping a week ago. Small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. The main street was lined with locally owned shops, a hardware store, a bakery, a diner that looked like it had been there since the founding of the town. American flags hung from lampposts. A banner across the street advertised an upcoming community fair. Jennifer's house was on a residential street a few blocks off Main, a modest 2-story with a wraparound porch and a yard that needed mowing. As Marcus pulled up behind her car, he saw neighbors emerging from their houses, drawn by some invisible signal that one of their own had returned. What happened next was something Marcus hadn't expected. Word had apparently spread about Emma's rescue, because within minutes the yard was full of people. They came bearing casseroles and flowers and offers of help. They hugged Jennifer and Emma, wiped tears from their eyes, shook Marcus's hand with crushing grips and heartfelt thanks. A large man with the weathered hands of someone who worked outdoors approached Marcus. "You're the one who found her. I'm the one who happened to be in the right place at the right time. I'm Tom Barrett. I own the hardware store downtown. Jennifer's my neighbor." He fixed Marcus with a direct gaze. "What you did today, that's not nothing. That's something special. I appreciate that, Mr. Barrett, but really, you know what I see too much of these days?" Barrett interrupted. "People who mind their own business. People who don't want to get involved. People who see something wrong and figure someone else will handle it." He shook his head. "What you did, stepping in like that for a stranger's child, that takes something most people don't have anymore." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded. As the evening wore on and the crowd eventually dispersed, Jennifer found Marcus standing on the edge of the yard, looking up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "You're a hard man to thank," she said, coming to stand beside him. "You've thanked me plenty. Words feel inadequate." She wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill. "I spent 2 weeks imagining the worst. Every night I would lie in bed and wonder if my daughter was cold, if she was hungry, if she was scared. I would wonder if I would ever see her again." Her voice cracked. "And then you called me, a stranger, calling to tell me my daughter was safe, that you had saved her. I didn't save her. I just bought her some time until the professionals arrived." Jennifer turned to look at him. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Minimize what you did. Deflect when people try to thank you." Marcus considered the question. It was a habit, he realized. Years of operating in the shadows, of completing missions that would never be acknowledged, of being part of a team where individual glory was frowned upon. You learned to deflect. You learned to minimize. You learned to say we instead of I. "Old habits," he said finally. "Well, maybe it's time for some new ones." Jennifer paused. "Where are you headed after this? Back to wherever you came from?" "I don't really have a wherever I came from. I've been driving for about 3 weeks, just moving." "Moving from what?" "That's the question, isn't it?" They stood in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of a small town settling into sleep. Somewhere, a dog barked. A car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the lawn before disappearing around a corner. "I have a guest room," Jennifer said finally. "It's nothing fancy, but it has a bed and clean sheets. You could stay, at least for the night. Get some rest before you continue your journey to nowhere in particular." Marcus knew he should decline. He had already gotten more involved than he usually did. The smart thing would be to find a motel, get some sleep, and be back on the road by morning. But when he looked at Jennifer, at this woman who had been through her own personal hell and was somehow still standing, still offering hospitality to a stranger, he found himself saying something different. "Yeah, okay, thanks." The guest room was small but comfortable. Marcus lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around him. Somewhere down the hall, he could hear the murmur of Jennifer's voice as she read Emma a bedtime story. The sound was strangely comforting. He slept better that night than he had in months. No nightmares, no waking up in a cold sweat, reaching for weapons that weren't there. Just deep, dreamless sleep. When he woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window and the smell of coffee was drifting up from downstairs. He lay there for a moment, orienting himself, remembering where he was and how he had gotten there. Then he heard Emma's voice, and he smiled despite himself. "Is he still here? Is Marcus still here?" "He's still here, baby, but he might be sleeping. Let's let him rest." "But I want to show him something." "What do you want to show him?" "My drawings. I want to show him my drawings." Marcus got up, pulled on his jeans and t-shirt from the day before, and made his way downstairs. Jennifer was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Emma was sitting at the table, a stack of papers in front of her. "Good morning," Jennifer said. "Coffee, please." Emma bounced out of her chair and ran over to him, clutching the papers to her chest. "Marcus, I made these for you." She thrust the papers at him, and Marcus found himself looking at a collection of crayon drawings. One showed a little girl with yellow hair standing next to a very tall man with brown hair. They were both smiling. Another showed what looked like a diner, with rain falling outside the windows. A third showed the same man and girl, but this time the man had a cape. "That's you," Emma said, pointing at the caped figure. "You're a superhero." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "I'm not a superhero, Emma. I'm just a regular guy." "Nuh-uh. You saved me. That makes you a superhero." He didn't know how to argue with that logic, so he didn't try. Instead, he carefully folded the drawings and tucked them into his back pocket. "I'll keep these safe," he said. "Thank you." Emma beamed at him, and for a moment the shadow that had been in her eyes since he first saw her in that diner seemed to lift. Breakfast was simple, scrambled eggs and toast, but it felt like one of the best meals Marcus had ever had. They talked about nothing in particular. Jennifer told him about her job at the local hospital, about the challenges of being a single mother, about her hopes that Emma would be able to move past what had happened. Emma, for her part, seemed determined to tell Marcus everything about her life. Her favorite color, which was purple. Her favorite animal, which was dolphins. Her best friend, whose name was Sophie. Her teacher, who was nice, but gave too much homework. It was normal, wonderfully, blessedly normal, and Marcus found himself not wanting it to end. "I should probably hit the road," he said finally, though the words felt wrong in his mouth. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "You haven't imposed at all," Jennifer said, "but I understand you have places to be." "No," Marcus admitted. "That's the thing. I really don't." Their eyes met across the table and something passed between them. An understanding, a question. "Then stay," Jennifer said simply. "At least for a while. This town could use someone like you." "What do you mean?" "I mean someone who steps up, someone who gets involved, someone who sees something wrong and does something about it." She smiled. "We have a sheriff's department, but it's just Sheriff Martinez and 2 deputies covering the whole county. We have good neighbors, but good neighbors can only do so much. What we don't have is someone like you." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not looking to be anyone's hero." "I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm asking you to be a neighbor, to be part of a community, to maybe possibly help us figure out how to keep each other safe." It was a modest proposal, a simple one. And yet it felt like the biggest decision Marcus had ever been asked to make. He looked at Emma, who was watching him with that same serious expression she'd had in the diner. He thought about Bull's words on the phone. "The skills don't go away. The instincts don't go away. You just have to find a new way to use them. I'll stay," he said, "for a while, see how it goes." Emma's face lit up. "Really? You're really staying? Really?" She launched herself out of her chair and wrapped her arms around him in a hug that nearly knocked him off balance. And Marcus, who had spent 18 years being trained to fight and survive and kill, found himself hugging her back. The next few weeks were an education. Marcus had lived in cities, on bases, in foreign countries where he didn't speak the language and couldn't trust anyone. He had never lived in a place like Millbrook. In Millbrook, people waved when they drove past you, even if they didn't know you. They left their doors unlocked. They brought food when someone was sick and offered help when someone was struggling. It was like stepping back in time to an America that Marcus had only seen in old movies. He found himself falling into a routine. Mornings he would go for a run, his usual 5 miles, though here he ran past farmhouses and fields instead of city blocks. Then he would stop by the diner, Mabel's, for coffee and whatever breakfast special was on offer. After that, he would find things to do. That was the strange thing about small towns. There was always something that needed doing, a fence that needed mending, a car that wouldn't start, a delivery that needed picking up from the train station 3 towns over. People had learned quickly that Marcus was willing to help, and they weren't shy about asking. He also spent a lot of time at Jennifer's house, At first, it was just to check in, to make sure she and Emma were adjusting. But gradually, it became something more. Dinner a few nights a week, helping Emma with her homework, which turned out to be mostly her teaching him how to do new math. Weekend trips to the park, where he would push her on the swings while Jennifer sat on a bench and watched. It wasn't a romantic thing. At least, Marcus didn't think it was. It was more like he had been absorbed into their family without either side consciously deciding to make it happen. He had a place at their table, a hook for his jacket by the door, a mug in the cupboard that was his mug. Emma's nightmares came less frequently as the weeks passed, though they didn't disappear entirely. Some nights, Jennifer would call him, her voice tight with worry, and Marcus would drive over to sit with Emma until she fell back asleep. He would tell her stories about places he had been, carefully edited for a 7-year-old audience, and she would listen with wide eyes until sleep claimed her again. About a month after he arrived in Millbrook, Marcus had his first meeting with Sheriff Roberto Martinez. They met at Mabel's diner over cups of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Martinez was in his late 50s, a compact man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. He had been sheriff of the county for over 20 years, and it showed in the lines on his face and the weariness in his voice. "I've been hearing about you," Martinez said, getting right to the point. "Seems like everywhere I go, someone's got a story about the stranger who's been helping out around town. Just trying to be a good neighbor." "Uh-huh." Martinez took a long sip of his coffee. "I also did a little checking up on you. Made some calls." Marcus felt a familiar tension in his shoulders. And apparently you're a hard man to get information about. Most of your service record is classified higher than I have clearance for. But the folks I did talk to, the ones who would talk, they had interesting things to say. Such as you were one of the best operators they'd ever worked with, such as you had a reputation for getting impossible jobs done, such as you once carried a wounded teammate 3 miles through hostile territory to get him to an evac point. Martinez set down his coffee cup. "That true?" Marcus shrugged. "It was more like 2 miles, and I had help for part of it." "Humble, too." Martinez smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Look, I'm not going to ask you about things you can't talk about. What I am going to ask is this. What are your intentions in my town?" It was a fair question. In Martinez's position, Marcus would have asked the same thing. Honestly, I'm not sure. I came here by accident, and I stayed because something felt right about it. This place, these people, they're different from anything I've experienced. I guess I'm trying to figure out if I fit here. And if you decide you don't fit, you just move on to the next town. Maybe. Or maybe I'll stick around. I haven't decided yet. Martinez studied him for a long moment. "I'm short-staffed," he said finally. "I've got 2 deputies covering an area the size of Rhode Island. Budget keeps getting cut. Good people keep leaving for better-paying jobs in the city. I could use someone with your skills." "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a conversation. You'd have to go through the academy, get certified. It would take time, but if you're serious about staying, about being part of this community, there might be a place for you in my department." It wasn't what Marcus had expected. Then again, nothing about the last month had been what he expected. "Let me think about it," he said. "Take all the time you need. The offer's not going anywhere." After Martinez left, Marcus sat alone in the booth, staring out the window at Main Street. A mother pushed a stroller past the hardware store. 2 old men sat on a bench outside the barber shop, deep in conversation. A teenager on a bicycle waved at someone across the street. It was peaceful, quiet. The kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. But Marcus knew better than most that danger could find its way anywhere. And when it did, these people would need someone who could stand between them and the darkness. Maybe Martinez was right. Maybe there was a place for him here after all. He thought about Jennifer and Emma, about the way Emma's face lit up when she saw him, about the quiet moments with Jennifer on her porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. He thought about the drawings still folded in his wallet, the ones showing a man with a cape, a superhero. He wasn't a superhero. He was just a man who had learned a particular set of skills and was trying to figure out what to do with them now that the war was over. Maybe the answer was simpler than he had made it. Maybe the answer was right here, in this little town, with these people who had somehow become his people without him realizing it. Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. "Sheriff Martinez, it's Webb. About that conversation we had. I'm interested." Spring arrived in Millbrook with a riot of color. Cherry blossoms lined Main Street, their petals drifting down like pink snow. Daffodils and tulips bloomed in window boxes and front yards. The air smelled of wet earth and new growth, and there was a feeling of optimism in the town that seemed to match the season. Marcus had been attending the police academy for 3 months now, commuting to the state capital 3 times a week for classes while keeping up his informal role as Millbrook's helper in residence. It was exhausting, but in a good way. For the first time since leaving the teams, he felt like he was building towards something rather than just existing. His relationship with Jennifer had evolved too, though neither of them had put a name to it yet. They spent most of their free time together now. Movie nights with Emma, Sunday dinners, long walks along the river that wound through the outskirts of town. One evening, as they sat on Jennifer's porch, watching the fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, Emma safely tucked into bed upstairs, Jennifer finally asked the question that had been hanging between them. "What are we doing, Marcus?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I don't know. What do you want us to be doing?" That's a very diplomatic answer. "I was trained to be diplomatic." Jennifer laughed softly. "I'm being serious. I like you. A lot. Emma adores you. But I need to know if this is going somewhere, or if one day you're going to decide that Millbrook isn't for you and disappear." It was a fair concern. She had already been abandoned by one man. She had every right to be cautious about letting another one into her life. Marcus took his time answering. This mattered. What he said next would set the course for everything that followed. "I can't promise you that nothing will ever change," he said finally. "Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise you this. I'm not going anywhere by choice. This place, you and Emma, it's become home. The first real home I've had since I was 18 years old, and I'm not going to throw that away." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. "Okay," she said simply. "Okay. Okay. Let's see where this goes." It wasn't a declaration of undying love. It wasn't a proposal or a commitment or any of the big romantic gestures that happened in movies. It was something better. It was 2 people, both scarred by life in their own ways, agreeing to take a chance on each other. Marcus squeezed her hand, and they sat there in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies dance in the darkness. The next morning, everything changed. Marcus was at the diner, finishing up breakfast before heading to the academy, when his phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. "Emma's school called. She didn't show up this morning. She left for the bus stop at the normal time, but she never got on the bus." The world went very still and very cold. Marcus was out of the diner and in his truck within 30 seconds. He called Jennifer as he drove. "What do we know?" "Nothing." Jennifer's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "She left at 7:30 like always. The bus comes at 7:45. The driver says she wasn't at the stop. Did she say anything this morning? Was she upset about anything?" "No, she was fine. She was excited about a science project. Marcus, what if—" "Don't," he said firmly. "Don't go there. We're going to find her." He thought through the possibilities as he drove. Emma running away didn't make sense. She was happy, adjusting well, had no reason to flee. A random accident was possible, but unlikely in a town this small, where everyone knew everyone, which left the option he didn't want to consider. "Jennifer, has Raymond Sims had any contact with you since the arrest?" "What? No, he's in prison. They sentenced him to 8 years. Are you sure he's still there?" Silence on the other end, then, "Oh, God." "Call Sheriff Martinez. Have him check on Sims's status. I'm going to search the route between your house and the bus stop." He hung up and focused on driving. The bus stop was 3 blocks from Jennifer's house, a straight shot down Maple Street. Marcus parked his truck at the corner and started walking, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. The neighborhood was quiet, most people already at work or inside starting their days. Marcus knocked on doors anyway, asking if anyone had seen Emma that morning. An elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson thought she might have seen her walking toward the bus stop around 7:35. A man named Carlos, who was loading his work truck, said he hadn't noticed anything unusual. Marcus reached the bus stop and stopped. It was just a regular corner, a green metal sign marking the spot where the school bus picked up children. Nothing remarkable about it, but something caught his eye. A piece of paper caught in the bushes next to the sidewalk. He pulled it free and felt his blood turn to ice. It was one of Emma's drawings, the one showing the man with the cape, the superhero. She had been here. She had made it to the bus stop. And something had happened. His phone rang. Sheriff Martinez. "Webb, we've got a problem. Raymond Sims was released 2 weeks ago. Some kind of error with his paperwork. He's supposed to be on parole, wearing an ankle monitor, but he cut it off 3 days ago and disappeared." Marcus closed his eyes. 2 weeks. Sims had been out for 2 weeks, and no one had thought to warn Jennifer or put extra protection on Emma. "Put out an Amber Alert," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "Emma Sullivan, 7 years old. Suspect is Raymond Sims. I'm sending you his description now. Already on it. I'm mobilizing everyone I've got. I need access to any surveillance cameras in the area. Traffic cams, business security footage, anything. I'll make some calls. And Martinez, this is my family. I'm not sitting on the sidelines." There was a pause, then, "I understand, but don't do anything stupid. We do this by the book." Marcus didn't respond. They both knew that if it came down to following the book or saving Emma, there was no choice to make. He spent the next 2 hours methodically canvassing the area around the bus stop. He talked to every resident, checked every alley, looked for any sign of where Emma might have gone or been taken. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A 12-year-old boy named Tyler, who lived 2 streets over and was homesick from school. "I saw a van," Tyler said, his voice nervous. "A white van. It was parked on Maple Street around 7:30. I noticed because it didn't have any writing on it, which was weird. Most vans have like company names on them, you know. Did you see anyone near the van?" "A man. Big guy. He was standing by the side door, like he was waiting for something." "Did you see the license plate?" Tyler shook his head. "It was too far away, but I think the first letter was K, maybe. It wasn't much, but it was something." Marcus called Martinez with the information. "White van, possibly starting with K, parked on Maple Street around the time Emma disappeared. Can you put out a bolo?" "On it. Where are you?" "Still canvassing. I'll let you know if I find anything else." He hung up and stood on the sidewalk, forcing himself to think clearly. Sims wasn't stupid. He had evaded capture for 2 weeks after taking Emma the first time. He knew how to stay off the radar. But he also wasn't a professional. He made mistakes. He had come to the diner that day in Oregon because he was confident, maybe even arrogant. He thought he could just walk in and take Emma back without anyone stopping him. That arrogance was his weakness, and Marcus intended to exploit it. He thought about what he knew of Sims from the court records and police reports he had accessed. The man was originally from a town called Riverside, about 100 miles north of Millbrook. He had family there, parents, a brother. It was a long shot. Sims would have to be incredibly stupid to go somewhere so obvious. But sometimes, when people were desperate, they retreated to what was familiar. Marcus made a decision. He was going to Riverside. He called Jennifer first. She answered on the first ring. "Did you find something?" "A lead, maybe. I'm going to follow it up." "Where? I'm coming with you." "No. I need you to stay here in case Emma tries to contact you or in case the police find something. And I need you to be safe. If Sims knows I'm looking for him, he might come back here." "Marcus, I can't just sit here and do nothing." "You won't be doing nothing. You'll be coordinating with Martinez, handling the media if they get involved, keeping this from turning into a circus. I need you to be the steady one. Can you do that?" There was a long pause. Then, quietly, "Yes, I can do that. I'm going to find her, Jennifer, whatever it takes. I know you will. Just come back safe, both of you." He promised her he would, and hoped it wasn't a lie. The drive to Riverside took 2 hours. Marcus used the time to think, to plan, to run through scenarios in his head. He had no legal authority here. He wasn't even a full deputy yet, just an academy trainee. If he confronted Sims and something went wrong, he could face serious consequences. He didn't care. Emma was out there, scared and alone, in the hands of a man who had already shown he was willing to hurt her. Legal consequences were the last thing on his mind. Riverside was a larger town than Millbrook, more industrial, with a paper mill that dominated the skyline and gave the air a distinctive smell. Marcus found the Sims family home easily enough, a rundown house on the edge of town, with overgrown grass and a sagging porch. He parked down the block and watched for a while. There was a car in the driveway, an old Ford sedan. No white van visible. After 20 minutes, a woman emerged from the house. She was in her 60s, heavy-set, with grey hair pulled back in a bun. She got into the Ford and drove away. Marcus waited another 10 minutes to make sure she wasn't coming back, then approached the house. He knocked on the front door. No answer. He tried the back door. Locked. But the lock was old, the kind you could defeat with a credit card and some patience. He was inside in less than a minute. The house was dim and cluttered, filled with the accumulated detritus of decades. Marcus moved through it silently, checking each room. Living room clear, kitchen clear, 2 bedrooms on the main floor, both empty. He found the basement stairs behind a door in the hallway. The stairs creaked as he descended. The basement was even more cluttered than the main floor, filled with boxes and old furniture and equipment from the paper mill. But there was a light on in the far corner, behind a makeshift partition of stacked boxes. Marcus moved toward it, every sense on high alert. He rounded the corner and found himself looking at a small enclosed space, a cot with a thin mattress, a bucket in the corner, a camping lantern providing the only light, and Emma. She was lying on the cot, curled into a fetal position, her eyes wide with fear. When she saw Marcus, her whole face transformed. "Marcus!" She launched herself off the cot and into his arms. "I knew you'd come. I knew it!" He held her tightly, checking her for injuries as he did. She seemed unharmed, physically at least. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" "No. He said he was taking me somewhere safe, but I knew he was lying. He's scary, Marcus. He's really scary." "I know, sweetheart, but you're safe now. I've got you." He pulled out his phone to call Martinez and realized there was no signal in the basement. He would have to get Emma out of here first. "Where is he? Where's Sims?" "He left. He said he was going to get supplies and that I'd better be here when he got back, or he'd be really mad." Marcus didn't want to think about what really mad might mean. "Okay, we're leaving. Stay close to me." They made it up the stairs and through the kitchen without incident. Marcus was starting to think they might actually get away clean when the front door opened and Raymond Sims walked in. Sims froze when he saw them, then his face twisted into something ugly. "You!" he spat. "The guy from the diner. I should have known." "It's over, Sims. Let us walk out of here." "Like hell it is." Sims reached behind his back and pulled out a gun, a small revolver that he pointed directly at Marcus. "She's mine. She was always supposed to be mine. Jennifer and I were going to be a family before she ruined everything." "She was never yours," Marcus said calmly, positioning himself between Sims and Emma, "and she's not going to be. Put the gun down. The police already know what you did. There's nowhere left to run." "Liar!" Sims's hand was shaking, the gun wavering. He wasn't a trained shooter, Marcus noted. He was scared and desperate, which in some ways made him more dangerous. "Nobody knows I'm here. Nobody knows anything." "They know, Ray. I told them. They're on their way right now." It was a bluff, mostly, but Sims had no way of knowing that. "Your only chance of getting out of this without a bullet in your head is to put the gun down and surrender." Sims's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, looking for options, finding none. "I can't go back to prison," he said, almost pleading. "You don't know what it's like in there." "I don't care what it's like. You kidnapped a child. You're going to pay for that one way or another. The only question is whether you walk into a courtroom or get carried into a morgue." Time seemed to stretch. Marcus watched Sims's trigger finger, watched the minute movements of his body, reading him the way he had read 1,000 threats in 1,000 dangerous situations. He saw the exact moment Sims made his decision. The gun came up. Marcus moved. In the teams, they called it getting off the X, moving out of the kill zone before the enemy could react. Marcus had done it hundreds of times. This time, he grabbed Emma and dove sideways, putting himself between her and the shooter, rolling behind the couch in the living room as Sims fired. The bullet went wide, shattering a window. Marcus came up in a crouch, assessing. Sims was panicking now, the gun waving wildly as he tried to find a target. "Stay down," Marcus whispered to Emma, who was pressed against the floor, her hands over her ears. He moved. Sims never saw him coming. One moment Marcus was behind the couch, and the next he was on top of Sims, wrenching the gun away, with a move that had been drilled into him until it was pure muscle memory. Sims hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of him. Marcus pressed his knee into Sims's back, pinning him the same way he had in the diner all those months ago. The revolver was in his hand now, pointed at the back of Sims's head. "Don't!" Sims gasped. "Please don't." Marcus's finger was on the trigger. It would be so easy, so quick. One pull and Raymond Sims would never threaten Emma again, would never threaten anyone again. "Marcus?" Emma's voice, small and scared, came from behind him. "Marcus, don't." He looked at her. She was still on the floor, tears streaming down her face, but she was watching him with those big, serious eyes. "You're not like him," she said. "You're a superhero. Superheroes don't do that." Something shifted in Marcus's chest. The rage that had been building since he found Emma's drawing at the bus stop, the cold fury that had driven him here, began to recede. She was right. She was absolutely right. He lowered the gun. "You're under arrest," he said to Sims, though he had no actual authority to arrest anyone. It didn't matter. The police would be here soon enough. "You have the right to remain silent." 15 minutes later, the house was surrounded by police cars. Riverside PD had jurisdiction, but Sheriff Martinez had made the drive too, along with Jennifer. When Jennifer saw Emma, she fell to her knees and gathered her daughter in her arms, sobbing. Emma cried too, holding on to her mother like she would never let go. Marcus stood off to the side, giving them space. His hands were still shaking slightly, the adrenaline slowly working its way out of his system. A Riverside officer had taken his statement, looked at him with something that might have been respect, and told him to stay put while they sorted everything out. Martinez approached him. "Hell of a thing you did today." "I got lucky." Lucky. Martinez shook his head. You tracked a kidnapper to another town, infiltrated a building without backup, and neutralized an armed suspect without firing a shot. That's not luck. That's training. I did what I had to do. Yeah, you did. Martinez was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, when you finish at the academy, you've got a job waiting for you in my department. What you did today, that's exactly the kind of person I want wearing a badge in my county. Marcus thought about that, about the job, the commitment it would represent, about staying in Millbrook, building a life there, about Jennifer and Emma. Yeah, he said, I think I'd like that. Later that night, after all the statements had been given and all the questions had been answered, Marcus sat on Jennifer's porch. Emma was asleep upstairs, sedated by the doctor's prescription and exhaustion. Jennifer sat beside him, her head on his shoulder. She told me what happened, Jennifer said softly. She told me you had Sims at your mercy, and you let him live. She asked me to. I know, but you could have justified it. Self-defense, protection of a minor. Nobody would have blamed you. I would have blamed me. Jennifer lifted her head to look at him. You're a good man, Marcus Webb. I try to be. You succeed. She kissed him then softly, a promise of things to come. Thank you. For everything. Marcus held her close and watched the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the lawn. It was peaceful, quiet, home. And Marcus knew with absolute certainty that he would do whatever it took to protect it. The summer that followed was the best of Marcus's life. He graduated from the police academy near the top of his class, despite being the oldest student there by more than a decade. Sheriff Martinez pinned the badge on him personally, in a small ceremony attended by Jennifer, Emma, and what seemed like half the town. His first day on the job was anticlimactic, a property dispute between two farmers who had been feuding for 30 years over a fence line. Marcus resolved it by listening to both sides, looking at the original property records and pointing out that neither of them actually owned the strip of land in question since it belonged to the county. They were so surprised that they forgot to be angry at each other. Other days were busier. A string of burglaries that turned out to be teenagers looking for thrills. A domestic disturbance that nearly turned violent before Marcus talked the husband into putting down the knife and getting help for his drinking. A lost hiker in the mountains who Marcus found using tracking skills he had learned in places he couldn't talk about. It wasn't the kind of work he had trained for. There were no terrorists to neutralize, no hostages to rescue, no enemies to eliminate. But there was something deeply satisfying about helping ordinary people with ordinary problems, about being part of a community instead of operating in the shadows. Emma started second grade in September. Marcus drove her to school on her first day, a compromise reached after Jennifer pointed out that she couldn't be there because of a meeting at the hospital. Emma didn't seem to mind. She chatted happily the whole way, telling him about her new backpack and her new pencils and her hopes that Sophie would be in her class again. At the school, she kissed him on the cheek and ran off to join her friends without looking back. Marcus sat in his truck for a long moment, watching her disappear into the building, feeling something he couldn't quite name. That evening, Jennifer made dinner to celebrate. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs, Emma's favorite. They ate together at the kitchen table, the three of them, and it felt so natural, so right, that Marcus had to remind himself this wasn't how it had always been. After Emma went to bed, Jennifer and Marcus sat on the porch, as had become their custom. The nights were getting cooler now, the first hints of autumn in the air. "I've been thinking," Jennifer said, about us, about what this is, what it's becoming." Marcus felt a flutter of nerves that was utterly unfamiliar. He had faced down armed terrorists without flinching, but this conversation made him anxious, "And what have you concluded?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to look at him, her eyes serious. "You're the best thing that ever happened to Emma, and to me. I know it hasn't been that long, and I know we're both carrying baggage. But when I think about the future, you're in it. Every version of it." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had never been good with words, with expressing emotions. That wasn't part of his training, but maybe that was okay. Maybe some things were better shown than said. He took Jennifer's hand. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I told you that before, and I meant it. Whatever comes next, I'm in." She smiled at him, that warm, genuine smile that had become his favorite sight in the world. "So we're doing this? For real?" "We're doing this. For real." She leaned into him, and they sat there together watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Fall turned to winter. Marcus discovered that Millbrook transformed into something magical when the snow came. The whole town looked like a postcard, all white roofs and smoking chimneys and children building snowmen in front yards. Emma's 8th birthday fell on the first weekend of December. Jennifer planned a small party, just family and a few close friends. But word got out, as it always did in small towns, and by the time the day arrived, half of Millbrook seemed to show up with presents and good wishes. Marcus spent most of the party manning the grill, cooking hot dogs and burgers despite the cold. He was more comfortable doing something useful than making small talk. But people kept coming up to him anyway, thanking him for one thing or another, telling him how glad they were that he had decided to stay. It was Tom Barrett, the hardware store owner, who finally put into words what Marcus had been feeling. "You know what the difference is between you and most people?" Barrett asked, warming his hands on a cup of coffee. "Can't say that I do. Most people look at a community like this and they see what they can get from it, what's in it for them, you know. But you look at us and you see what you can give. That's rare. That's special." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he just nodded and flipped another burger. But that night, after the party was over and Emma had been put to bed clutching her new stuffed dolphin, Marcus thought about what Barrett had said. He had spent so much of his life taking, in a sense. Taking lives, taking objectives, taking whatever was necessary to complete the mission. The idea that he could spend the rest of his life giving instead, that he could build something rather than destroy, was still new to him. But he was learning. Christmas came and went, celebrated with a tree that Emma insisted on decorating herself, resulting in a lopsided distribution of ornaments that Marcus privately thought was perfect. New Year's Eve found Marcus and Jennifer watching the fireworks from the town square, Emma perched on his shoulders for a better view. As the clock struck midnight and the new year began, Marcus made a silent resolution. He would do whatever it took to protect this life he had stumbled into. This family that had claimed him as their own. This community that had given him a purpose. Whatever it took. The trouble started in late February. It began with small things. A broken window at the elementary school, graffiti on the side of Mabel's diner. A car with slashed tires in the parking lot of the grocery store. Minor vandalism, the kind that happened everywhere. But then it escalated. Someone set fire to a shed behind the Baptist church. It was empty, and the fire was put out before it spread. But it could have been much worse. A week later, the hardware store was broken into, but nothing was stolen. The intruder had simply trashed the place, overturning shelves and smashing displays. Marcus worked each case methodically, interviewing witnesses, gathering evidence, trying to find a pattern. But the perpetrator was careful. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses who could provide a useful description. Then the notes started appearing. The first one was found taped to the door of the sheriff's station. It was printed on plain white paper in a generic font. You think you're safe, you're not. The second one was left in Jennifer's mailbox. He can't protect you. No one can. Marcus felt cold when he saw it. This wasn't random. Someone was targeting his family specifically. He doubled down on the investigation, working 18-hour days, barely sleeping. Sheriff Martinez assigned his other 2 deputies to help, but they were stretched thin, covering the whole county. It wasn't enough. The answer, when it finally came from an unexpected source. Marcus was at Mabel's diner, going over case files for the 100th time, when a young man slid into the booth across from him. He looked to be in his early 20s, with the haunted eyes of someone who had seen too much. "You're the cop, right? The one everyone talks about?" Marcus nodded slowly. "And you are. Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is I know who's been causing trouble in town." "I'm listening." The young man looked around nervously. "There's a group. They call themselves the Sons of Freedom. They're based up in the mountains, in an old logging camp. Mostly just a bunch of guys who think the government is out to get them, you know. But their leader, he's different. He's got a grudge against this town specifically." "Why?" "Because of you." The young man met Marcus's eyes. "His name is Derek Walsh. Ring any bells?" Marcus thought for a moment. The name was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Walsh used to be a cop in Portland," the young man continued, "until he got caught planting evidence on suspects. He got fired, lost his pension, everything. His wife left him. His kids won't talk to him. He blames law enforcement for ruining his life." "What does that have to do with me?" "About 8 months ago, Walsh was passing through Millbrook, got pulled over for a busted tail light. Deputy who wrote the ticket was you." Marcus remembered now. A routine traffic stop, nothing special. The guy had been surly, resentful, but had taken his ticket and driven away. Marcus hadn't thought about it since. "Let me get this straight. A man is terrorizing this town because I gave him a ticket for a broken taillight. It's not about the ticket. It's about what you represent. You're a former Navy SEAL who became a small-town cop. You're everything Walsh thinks is wrong with the world. He's been watching you for months, planning this. The vandalism, the fires, the notes. It's all him. How do you know all this?" The young man looked away. "I was part of his group. For a while. Thought they had the right idea about things, but what Walsh is planning now, it's too much. I can't be part of it." "What is he planning?" "Something big. Soon. He wouldn't tell us the details, but he's been stockpiling weapons. Talking about making a statement, about showing this town what happens when you put your faith in people like you." Marcus felt ice water in his veins. "When?" "I don't know. Days, maybe. He's been getting more erratic, more paranoid. I think he's close to making his move." "Where's this camp? Where can I find him?" The young man gave him directions. Then he stood to leave. "One more thing," Marcus said. "Why are you telling me this? You could have just walked away." The young man paused. "Because there's a little girl in this town whose mom works at the hospital. I see her sometimes on her way to school. She waves at me." He shook his head. "Whatever Walsh is planning, kids could get hurt. I can't have that on my conscience." He walked out, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his fears. The next 24 hours were a blur of activity. Marcus briefed Sheriff Martinez, who called in support from the state police. They planned a raid on the compound, a tactical approach designed to neutralize the threat with minimal casualties. But Marcus knew with a bone-deep certainty that it wasn't going to be that simple. He was right. The morning of the planned raid, Martinez called him at 6 a.m. "Webb, we've got a problem. Walsh isn't at the compound. Our informant says he left last night with 2 of his most loyal followers. They're armed, and they're heading for Millbrook." Marcus was already pulling on his clothes, his phone pressed to his ear. "What's their target?" "Unknown. But today's the day of the town council meeting. Half the town will be at the community center." the town council meeting, which Jennifer was attending, representing the hospital's interests in a zoning dispute, which Emma was attending because she was supposed to present a project on local history as part of a school assignment. His family was in the direct path of whatever Walsh had planned. Marcus was in his truck and moving. Before Martinez finished talking, he called Jennifer. "Pick up," he muttered. "Come on, pick up." "Voicemail." He tried again, same result. He pushed the truck faster, flying down the empty morning roads toward town. In his mind, he was running scenarios. Walsh and two others, armed. Approximately 50 people at the community center, including children. Limited entry points, no way to evacuate without being seen. His tactical training kicked in automatically. He would need to approach from the rear, find an entry point Walsh wasn't watching, neutralize the threats before they could hurt anyone, but he was one man against three. With civilians in the crossfire, he needed help. His phone rang. Deputy Sarah Chen. "Webb, I'm 5 minutes out from the community center. Martinez is coming from the north with state police backup, but they're at least 20 minutes away. I'm 3 minutes out. Walsh is probably already there. We can't wait for backup." "So what do we do?" Marcus thought fast. "Back entrance. There's a service door that leads to the kitchen. We go in quiet, assess the situation, and engage only if we have a clear shot." "Copy that. See you there." He arrived at the community center and parked his truck 2 blocks away, approaching on foot. He could see Walsh's vehicle parked in front, a beat-up pickup truck, which meant Walsh was already inside. Chen met him at the back of the building. She was pale but determined, her hand steady on her weapon. "Ready?" Marcus asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." They entered through the service door, moving silently through the kitchen. Marcus could hear voices coming from the main room, the murmur of the crowd interspersed with something louder, someone shouting. He peeked through the serving window that connected the kitchen to the main hall. What he saw made his blood run cold. Walsh was standing on the stage at the front of the room, an assault rifle in his hands. His 2 followers were positioned at the main doors, also armed, preventing anyone from leaving. The crowd, maybe 60 people, sat frozen in their seats. Some were crying, some were praying. All of them were terrified. Marcus scanned the room, looking for Jennifer and Emma. He found them near the front, sitting in the second row. Jennifer had her arm around Emma, holding her close, her face pale but calm. Emma's eyes were wide, but she wasn't crying. She was being brave. "That's my girl," Marcus thought. Walsh was ranting now, something about government oppression and corruption and the lies of law enforcement. He was clearly unhinged, pacing back and forth, the rifle swinging wildly. "This town thinks it's special," Walsh shouted. "Thinks it's got some kind of hero looking out for it. Where's your hero now, huh?" "I'm right here," Marcus said, stepping out of the kitchen. Everyone turned. Walsh spun, the rifle coming up. But Marcus already had his pistol aimed, and he was faster. The shot hit Walsh's rifle, sending it spinning out of his hands. Walsh stumbled back, clutching his wrist. "Don't," Marcus said to the 2 guards at the door, who were raising their own weapons. "I put 3 rounds in that rifle in the time it would take you to blink. You really want to test me?" One of them made a decision. He dropped his weapon. The other one hesitated. Chen came through the kitchen door behind Marcus, her weapon trained on the second guard. "Drop it now!" He dropped it. The whole thing had taken less than 10 seconds. Martinez arrived with backup 10 minutes later, finding the scene already secured. Walsh and his followers were in handcuffs. The townspeople were being evacuated, shell-shocked, but unharmed. Jennifer ran to Marcus the moment she was clear of the building, throwing herself into his arms. "You came," she whispered. "I knew you would come." "Always," he said, "always." Emma was quieter, but when Marcus crouched down to her level, she wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight. "You saved everyone," she said, "just like a superhero." "No, sweetie, I just did my job." She pulled back and looked at him with those serious eyes. "You're still my superhero, though." Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes, which was ridiculous. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since he was a child himself. But some things he was learning were worth crying over. Spring came again to Millbrook as it always did. The cherry blossoms bloomed on Main Street. The daffodils emerged from the still cold earth. Life went on. Marcus had been offered commendations, awards, even a job with the state police. He turned them all down. Millbrook was his home now, and he wasn't leaving. He and Jennifer got married in May, in a small ceremony at the community center, the same place where Marcus had faced down Derek Walsh just 3 months earlier. It seemed fitting somehow. A place of fear transformed into a place of joy. Emma was the flower girl. She took her duties very seriously, scattering petals with meticulous precision, pausing every few feet to make sure she was doing it right. The whole town turned out for the wedding. It seemed like everyone Marcus had helped over the past 2 years wanted to be there, wanted to celebrate this moment with them. Tom Barrett was his best man. Sheriff Martinez performed the ceremony. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman from the neighborhood where Marcus had found Emma's drawing, baked the cake. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up that could probably be heard in the next county. Later that evening, after the reception had wound down and the guests had gone home, Marcus sat on the porch of what was now their house, the house they would share as a family. Jennifer was putting Emma to bed. The night was quiet, peaceful, full of possibility. He thought about the long road that had led him here, the years of service, the missions, the sacrifices, the discharge papers and the handshake, and the sudden terrifying freedom of not knowing what came next. He thought about a rainy day in Oregon, a diner called Rosie's, and a little girl with haunted eyes who had looked at him and seen a superhero. He thought about what Bull had told him all those months ago. The skills don't go away. The instincts don't go away. You just have to find a new way to use them. He had found it, not in war zones or classified operations, but in a small town in Oregon where people still waved at strangers and left their doors unlocked. In protecting a community that had become his own, in loving a woman and her daughter who had become his family. The door opened behind him, and Jennifer came out to sit beside him. "She's asking for you," she said. "She wants you to tell her a story." Marcus smiled. What kind of story? The one about the superhero, her favorite. He stood up, leaning down to kiss Jennifer before heading inside. At the door, he paused. "You know, I never expected any of this. When I left the Navy, I thought my life was over. Turns out it was just beginning." Jennifer smiled at him. "Life's funny that way." "Yeah, it is." He went inside to tell Emma her story, the story of a superhero who wasn't really a superhero at all, just a man who had stumbled into a diner on a rainy day and found everything he never knew he was looking for. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath them. But in that house, in that town, something extraordinary was happening. A family was being made, a community was being strengthened, a man was discovering who he was meant to be. And that, Marcus thought as he climbed the stairs to Emma's room, was the greatest mission of all. The years that followed would bring their own challenges, their own triumphs, their own moments of fear and joy. Marcus would face other threats, solve other crimes, help other people. He would watch Emma grow from a scared little girl into a confident young woman. He would build a life with Jennifer that was richer and more fulfilling than anything he had imagined. But he would always remember that first day, the rain on the roof of his truck, the flickering neon sign, the little girl in the booth who had looked at him like he was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered. Because sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones who storm beaches or infiltrate enemy compounds. Sometimes they're the ones who walk into a diner on a rainy day, see a child in need, and simply refuse to look away. Marcus Webb had been many things in his life: a soldier, a sailor, a weapon aimed at America's enemies. But his greatest achievement would always be this: he had seen a helpless child, and he had helped her. Everything else, all the love and community and purpose that came after, grew from that single simple act. They thought it was just a helpless child. They were wrong. It was the beginning of everything.